starting a podcast, like many others, and other things I've put off. I've put off my podcast. I believe I was embracing excuses on why not to do a podcast. Mainly, my biggest stump was not having a mic set up, not having an audio card, mixer, not having my programs installed inside my computer properly. Anything to keep me from doing it. My main thing was my microphone, that I didn't want to just record from my computer. I didn't want to just record from my phone. I wanted to have the best audio quality that I could when creating my podcast, instead of working on material. And as time goes on, I build. I was embracing excuses, like you've seen the Bar Rescue show. You know, I'm kind of paraphrasing. I was embracing excuses. I wasn't focusing on, as he says, like the solution. And you can easily snowball your excuses. So I wanted to have the best setup. I didn't want to just record and use the audio from the mic that's in my computer, that's in my phone. As I just said, I wanted to use really good microphones, the best sound quality. I would consider myself kind of sort of an audio engineer, you could say. So you could maybe see why I would want that. And most people, if they were going to start something, maybe they would just go ahead and do it, and they wouldn't have those kinds of blockages. But I thought about how other people have created YouTube videos or podcasts, even famous people. Russell Brand recorded YouTube videos right from his living room on his computer and didn't have a microphone set up, and I could tell that it was coming right from his computer. I listened to a podcast the other day about with Bill Maher, and he was interviewing Lars Ulrich, and Lars is the drummer from Metallica. The sound quality was very bad. I was actually quite surprised. I thought maybe it would sound a lot better, in other words. I just thought it would sound better. And so I decided I was going to start recording on my computer, and here I am. I'm using my phone. I have an iPhone, and I'm recording. So why am I here? Actually, because of a famous organization, a university known as Princeton University. I conducted radio shows there. Different types of radio shows, from electronic, jazz. I did a lot of continuous mixing stuff, house music, electronic music. Not to sound redundant there. And then I was also getting paid doing something I loved. I was broadcasting sports events. They're basketball, football, lacrosse. And I was the not only the engineer there, patching in the announcers from remote locations. I was considered the producer too, because I was putting the show together with the commercials. I was taking the sound bits, adding them to files or storage at the radio station. And I was getting paid. I was getting paid pretty good to do something that I actually really love to do. It was quite nice. And, I started, if you go back to about 2001, I went to training. I started training at WPRB. It was the name of the radio station. It is said to be the oldest college radio station in New Jersey. And what makes this radio station very unique is its broadcasting range is about parallel to a commercial radio station in this tri-state area. So you had a pretty large audience. And I also had a paid gig, but I also had the freedom of creating whatever I wanted to, which was amazing. And I started back in 2001. I was doing a training thing there. I never really finished or anything. I remember soldering wires, putting together different types of wires and just some basic things. And then I just didn't show up or something. And then what had happened is my friend Greg and we both worked at the PU store, the Princeton University bookstore. He had got me a job there. I originally was just going to work there for the school season because it was a bookstore and all the students at the university would go to this bookstore primarily to get their books, and all their books would be there. The professors would put their books there, and it was a lot of work, a lot of organizing, categorizing. I ended up wanting to work in the book department there, which was nice. It was kind of like working in a bookstore. The PU store at one point in time was a store where people went there for sheet music, and not only for the school books, but they went there for music. And back when people would buy actual sheet music, I'm sure they still do, when it was more popular. Very unique store. And so I ended up working there for a bit back in 2001. And my friend Greg had a show. And there was a manager, Gary, that was our manager. And Gary had a jazz show, and I think that he talked with Gary, and they were like, yeah, if you want a show, whatever. And he wanted to do a hip hop show. And I remember him having some issues with, it was quite funny, with the program director about certain specific things that he was playing, and there was a lot of freedom. However, he did have a really late night show. I know you were able to, after 10 o'clock, you were able to have more profanity, and then after 12, there was even more levels of profanity, per se, that were allowed. We were saying this by playing an announcement saying that you are, it was your constitutional right to be able to play certain types of lyrical content, your expressiveness or your artistic expression per se. So he had a show, and I came sometimes on WPRB 103.3 FM. Excuse me here, I'm getting a little dried mouth. This is my first podcast, so it's going to be a journey, in other words. And he had this show, and I knew about this radio station for a very long time. It was something that I wanted for a while. It was actually something that changed my life. I started probably when I was in high school is when it took off. That I listened to this radio station. I recorded the radio station. We would record these mixtapes because the music that I was listening to at the time was a continuous mix. And I was listening to a very famous show, a very groundbreaking show, a show that changed not only the music that we listened to in the area. It was such an influencer, but it changed style. It brought something it brought electronic music out of the underground, and it helped bring it into the mainstream. And it helped bring it to people that weren't used to it. It still is a powerful tool, but at the time, also the radio station was, I don't know if you want to say bandwidth, but the radio station, I guess maybe the signal alone was more powerful. You could say that. It had a more powerful signal. And now I know at some point this happened, and it still is. I know the signal isn't as stronger. It was shared. The signal was shared. But at the time, you had something that was being broadcasted. It was a very, very powerful, not only a large radius area, which it still is, I believe, that same radius area, but the sound quality and the oomph of that was way more amplified than it is now. It carried a lot more. So you had that mixed in with another way of an artistic way of actually playing music but performing at the same time, as if that was a hybrid. So what I'm talking about is simply, some people might know what I'm talking about and some people might not. I'm simply talking about continuously mixed music. But at the time, it was something that I never heard before. I never heard music like this. It was a show called Bassquake. And they were playing music called drum and bass, jungle. I never heard anything like this in my life. It changed me. At the time, I was in a band. And I remember at some point the band broke up. And there was a feeling that I specifically remember. I don't think I'll ever forget this, but I still need to really write this down. And I don't want to get too far off from where I'm actually going, but I'm trying to pull all this together here. There was a feeling that I got playing in my band that it's the most amazing thing that I captured that actual feeling driving around in my car, listening to the radio station and listening to this radio show that made me feel like I was so part of the music that I was actually performing it. It felt parallel to music performance just by listening. And it was I can hear it now in my head. It's the pounding of the drums and it must have been the synthesizers or the way that they were able to create and modulate bass sounds at that time. I graduated high school in 97. And to have these drum samples from old jazz records is what they would do. Like, specifically, I found out, it's another story, through Max Roach records, specifically where these dry breaks were used. Even single kicks, like single hits of snares, were broken down, and then they were sequenced, and with the limitations of the technology that was available to people at that time. And this music was drum and bass / jungle, what they would call it. There was certain, subgenres within there, but really it fell under the umbrella of jungle and drum and bass. And it was a music that was more popular at the time in England, and probably still always was, an English form of music. And there was debates about with that the jungle aspect of it too, with it being played in New York City at the Limelight, and DJ Soul Slinger, one of the pioneers of it, or they're said to be the person who brought over this type of music, and the style, and it makes sense too. The structure as well from Brazil. DJ Soul Slinger was supposedly kicked out of the Limelight for playing this music. So, and it was very, there were so many subgenres of it that you could hate. I didn't. I liked it all. They had its dark aspects, some of it that maybe I tried to stay away from, but I could see people actually hating one aspect of it. You could really even see it in the clubs. And then of this whole genre of music, and then another subgenre of this music, of this specific music, like not liking it, like loving it and hating it, like two different Like, one person might love the hip-hop version of jungle drum and bass, but they hate the dark aspect of the jungle drum and bass. I mean, they hate it. They can't listen to that, but they can listen to the other subgenre. There's like a dark step and a tech step, but they can listen to the jump up, and that's it. Or the stuff they would label as anthems. So it was like once put to me that this style of music, some kind of forum, and I'm paraphrasing from somebody I don't even know. The person might have been a famous DJ at the time. Who knows? But the music, and I think the person did come from the New York area. The music is like Legos. And the drum and bass jungle is like Legos. You could just have all these different colors and things, and they just kind of connect. You could just take any form of music that you can think of, and in some way, you can attach it to it. So it was just a whole new approach for me, somebody who did their classical trainings, jazz training, played rock guitar, sung in a band. Band didn't work out, and then here we are, listening to something on the radio. And I remember I was high at the time, I was stoned. And I was like, what is this? And it just blew me away. It was just, I'm in all now. I have these things here that I'm recording, and I have these things here saying that don't say no ums, exclamation mark, no like, and no ah. A little bit's okay. You don't want to go too crazy. Nobody really wants to hear all those things. So anyway, kind of getting off track here from what I'm really trying to convey. But I was stoned, and it just satisfied me. I guess some things are hard to really convey to other people, what it's like if you weren't in a band and you don't know what it's like to have that interlocking feeling with somebody or somebody's, more than one person, to have that connection in a band. It's telepathic. It's beyond, I think it's beyond our understanding. It's such a wonderful thing, and to really try to tell someone else what that's like, unless you know what someone else does. That really, there was a cool movie that I saw on Disney. It was my son liked it a lot. We watched it several times. I remember the movie Soul. And in that movie, they got into the zone. Several times they were into this place called the zone. It was an actual place that it was almost like people that would meditate, people that would play guitar, even people that would play basketball or play a sport, boxing even. Anything that causes you to be in this meditative state was in this zone. And if you can understand what that is, if you ever are in that zone, that's what it's like playing with another band. So if you can imagine that, take that, this really, it's an abstract concept without a doubt. You take this concept And that, to me, was achieved by listening to this music. Not that that would do that for every single person. Of course not. I don't know if it maybe even would do that for anybody else. But the thing is that it did it for me. And that was amazing because I was feeling depressed. I didn't feel good. This was something that was part of me, being in a band, and I lost that. So being able to hear something like that was hope. It was like light at the end of the tunnel. And that's what WPRB was to me. There were so many. I mean, I was so addicted to listening to this. I would tape it, like I said, other people. I wish I still had these tapes or other people. They're out there. I know the person is still around that created the show. But there were other electronic shows, too, that were coming out now. And that's really, like, I wanted to do that, you know, because now it wasn't just like, you think of a concept of a band, and you have a band, you're like, all right, well, there's all these egos, and maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. You have a band and there's all these egos, and they break up, and it's because it's like you have to manage that partnership of everybody together. It's a relationship, and it takes time, and it takes understanding, and it takes acceptance, and it takes patience to do all these things. And people don't want to deal with that. Or maybe there's a few number of the people that want to work together, but then, you know, they look at other people. Like in my case, what happened was my friend and I were basically kicked out of the band. And, you know, it still to this day, it stings. It hurt, you know. It's kind of, actually, interestingly, writing this, and I kind of dug into right now, talking about it, things that I wasn't going to bring up. And I tell you, I could feel the emotional pull is greater than maybe I realized, because that was a very touchy area, and I really didn't even quite think about it so much until now, about how much that affected me, because I did feel bad. I was a lot younger then, and the band broke up, and I found satisfaction in something. But like, I want to do this. You know, I want to be a DJ. It was a big, wow, I'm actually getting very emotional. It was a decision that, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, good or evil, you know, black or white, positive or negative, you know, we'll just go on with the opposites. I don't want to say it's just one or the other, but it was a decision that changed the rest of my life. This one thing, this one decision to pursue what I pursued affected everything in my life. So, I mean, this was a big decision of mine to take being kind of down and figuring out a creative way to expressing myself. And I mean that, like, just like that. Like, and I was trying earlier, I don't know if I really touched on it exactly. But the point I'm trying to make too is that when you're in a band and the egos and that doesn't work out, and if you wanted to go and now be this solo artist and be this person that plays by yourself, it's a different thing. And it's a stripped down thing. And you're thinking of the harmonies and how everybody's playing together and working together. And then you have this acoustic, one would say, right, version of a song. Like, it's like you took a song, any famous song that you like, even like you listen to like their Nirvana, unplugged, or just think of an artist that like a heavy metal song or a Metallica song per se, because we were talking about Metallica earlier. You take one of their songs and you play an acoustic version, just that is a stripped down version of like an isolation of that song. And it's not the same expression. But to hear something that to me was like a drug, it was this instant gratification to hear sounds that I just was like, wow, that does it for me. That drives me wild. And it was like mysterious, and it was a whole new world to research, to go into. And that's, people are using this term now. I'm hearing that rabbit hole a lot. Well, that's the rabbit hole that I went down. I went down that DJing and that electronic music at that time rabbit hole. And it filled that void in my life. And it was great. It was an amazing time. And I'm going to go into that more with my podcasts to come in the future. More of that, type of stuff. And, but I really wanted to be a DJ now on WPRB. And I saw it after that. This is going to take you where I left off at. And I saw it after that. And that's what I did. My friend had it. I was working at the PU store. All right. I had a thing for Princeton at the time. I loved to go to the city. It was a fun place to go. I went on a date once with a girl. And ever since then, because before, it's the funniest thing. Before I went on that date with her, and we were going to some kind of like prom thing. Like, not the prom, but it was like a social thing, they called it. And I got my mom to take us to Princeton, like, because she was like, let's go hang out in Princeton. I'm like, Princeton? Why am I going to go hang out in Princeton? Like, I associated Princeton with doctor's office visits because I had asthma as a kid. When I was younger, I had really bad asthma, which I think really contributes a lot to my imagination and having a lot of time off from school and everything. But I used to go to a lot of doctors' office visits in Princeton, and I just thought that the doctors was at Princeton. And she wanted to go hang out at Princeton. And it was like the first time, I think I was in 10th grade at the time. I walked around the university kind of aimlessly. And it was the coolest, mysterious thing. There was just something in the architecture and in the air. It was just like, I've heard Christopher Reed say before that it's a magical place, and it couldn't be more right. Like, you go into Princeton, and if you're, not numb completely, you'll feel something. There's something in the air there. There's a greatness there. I mean, beyond like the people that are snotty and maybe people that are too rich, but there is a vast amount of creativity there. And if you're a creative person, you know that when you're around creative people, that there's just this harmonious bouncing effect, kind of, I guess you could say, between artists and just musicians, and just this feeding off of ideas, and it just feels so wonderful. You're just kind of right where you're supposed to be. So for me, walking around just the university, I mean, let alone the town right there in Nassau Street, it was incredible. And years to follow, we really used to hang out in Princeton. High school, I liked going there. It was not too far. It was about, I remember I said, you hop on 295 north, which was really confusing, the whole 295 north would turn into 95 south, would head towards Princeton, but then would U around and head towards Philadelphia. But I remember the exit 8B or something right off of there. I used to say to myself, 8B the exit, was some kind of like poetic saying I would say to myself when I would go to my friend's house who actually lived on Nassau Street, and we'd hang out there when I was older. But I really had a thing now for the town, at least in high school. I fell in love with the coffee shops, for one, was a big thing where there was a particular coffee shop that their coffee was so potent, and it would keep me up all night. And I would work on music usually. I would play guitar, or I would be with friends or whatever. But we'd have pot and stuff usually. And it was at the time that pot was illegal, so sometimes we'd run out of it. And that was really what kind of brought me down. But if I didn't, I remember like the coffee was a very racy type of thing. So I'm just trying to check and see what time it is here. Make sure I'm not going on too long. But I did kind of go into, it was really interesting. I went into areas that I feel like I kind of had an idea where I was going to go with this. And the whole point of this that I'm trying to convey to you is, why do I want to create a podcast? What is the purpose behind this? And kind of the history about me. And I want you to get a foundation kind of why I'm going to pursue it. And as I'm doing that, as I'm verbally expressing my foundation, I'm actually going to be creating the foundation. And that's kind of the idea here. But I feel like maybe in some aspects I kind of, because there's so much information here, I don't want to convey too much on things that maybe aren't going to, at least yet, portray the picture that at least I'd like you to see, which is just my life. And beyond that, well, there's some more. There's a point here that I'm going to get into. I promise you I'll get into it, because I did prepare myself that I'm not just randomly speaking, like this is all really thought out. So kind of leaving off you and kind of maybe going ahead here, we're painting a picture of what Princeton looks like, what it means to me. You have an idea how important this is to me. And from both the area and the music, what it means to me. So, it's a lot. There's a lot here where I'm almost feeling that it should be done in like two parts, maybe, to just kind of convey very simply to you what I'm trying to accomplish here. It's really hard to let alone put it into words, so there is a meaning to all this. It's all kind of ties together. And I think that I visually painted the picture too much. Was I was worried that maybe I was going to jump over things a bit and not present to you what I really mean. Because I just want to, like, I wish you could see my mind and you could see what's inside. I'm just trying to show you what I'm trying to accomplish by some history of what's really going on. And there's a lot more. There is a lot more, and even if I get through everything in this first podcast, if I get through everything, within all this stuff, there's stuff that's happened way before, and then everything that I've expressed, there's so much more to elaborate on. You might have so many questions. So I know I have so many questions that I need to be answered. But getting back to the But Greg, that my friend, he worked at this Princeton University bookstore. And I worked there. It was a hard job. And Gary was the manager. He had a jazz show for a very long time, even after this time, which was probably before 2001. And Greg had a really hip-hop radio show late at night. And I got a chance to go there. Now, I visited the radio station. I think it was him and I. We went to see a DJ and knocked on the door. And he let us in, and we're like, hey, we're so-and-so. And somehow he was cool with us, which we didn't really know him that well. I think he went to my high school, but he was DJing. He was actually playing drum and bass. And something happened with him. I don't know. I know he was a grad student at Princeton, but I wasn't. I didn't have access to the studio, and I didn't go to the school, but I did work at the bookstore, and I did go to some of their parties that they had, and I did know some people. I started meeting people very, not closely, but introduced through other people. Not to really mention any specifics as of yet. I don't want to perform any kind of form of blasphemy at all. But I ended up going to his show a few times, and he ended up losing the show, was basically what happened. Yeah, I mean, there was a crazy time, too, I wrote down here about a DJ that we had, and maybe real quick off the subject, how the first time I saw a DJ create a delay with simply a volume, and it was the most insane thing, and the sound was like, bop, 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 bop. And he did that by just, like, you see how, like, these lines here, like, you would just simply go like this, like, just gradually the volume up and then down and then up, but not as up, and down, and just gradually kind of working his way down. And doing that, like, creating that sound, but really fast too, and way more like intricate scratching and creating sounds with a very simple mixer blew me away. It was like nothing I've ever witnessed before. It was just a whole new approach to me of creating music. So this was big for me. This was like it. This is like what I wanted to do. I was like so like this made life so exciting for me. I get tears just thinking about it. Like, I mean, it's performance. It's part of what I am as a performer. I'm always loved entertaining people. Like, it makes me feel so good to hear someone say that they relate with you with music, with that you made something, you created something that just touched somebody. It's the most wonderful thing in the world. It's why we're here. I mean, we're really here for each other. But again, I'm kind of getting off the subject exactly. And it was cool. So he lost that radio show though. And he did something where he ended up getting busy, and it wasn't that much to him, and some of the, you know, with all due respect, he was having some issues with some of the upper management there at the time, and they're understandable. They're undergrads. They're not older, very mature people. They are students at Princeton, but that's who you're dealing with, and you're dealing with maybe someone who's not in there very long and doesn't have a full understanding of how things work, and there was conflict there, and it ended. But I didn't mention that. I did call, and I decided that I would reach out, and I called. I think I wrote at the time, and I said I called the radio station. I used to do a show with my friend, and I think I talked to, her name was Kendall. She was really nice with me, a little stern, a little short. I remember thinking she was beautiful. She had like not in a weird, creepy way, but she was just beautiful, but she had a sternness to her and everything. And I called her first somehow. I talked on the phone and asked about the radio station. I was surprised that she actually answered. And she said, well, I think it was like that weekend or that day or a couple of days, or it wasn't that far off. I said, I already know how to do things. No real training or anything. And she said, well, why don't you come in, and you're interested in doing a jazz show? And jazz? Yeah, that's it. Let's do it. Sure. I love jazz. And the rest was history. I was like, wow, I got a jazz show. So I graduated high school in 97. This is not that far off from graduation. I'm having trouble at school, paying attention. I'm in college at this point. I'm going to Mercer County College. It was hard for me to focus, my anxiety. I had bouts of paranoia. I was drinking too much coffee. Partying, I was smoking lots of weed, amongst other things. Wasn't really at all a drinker at this point in my life. Definitely had some problems, some pretty big problems with it later. But at this point, I'm having a lot of other problems anyway. So, which they were overwhelming. It was that's why it was hard for me to focus. It was hard for me to pay attention. But I was going to school for music, and I was going to Mercer County, and it was cool that now I was going to have a radio show, and so I thought that was neat. I was going to have a radio show. At some point, I ended studying. I'm not really sure along the timeline. I'm actually working on that right now. But I went to Mercer County College, a community college, for radio. Eventually, and I had a show at Princeton. So I had a radio show at Princeton, but I was studying radio at Mercer County College. So, and I went to Mercer County, and I eventually studied radio later. But at first I went for music, and I had trouble finishing and showing up to class. I had a lot of issues going on then. And and things became overwhelming, but it was cool. I ended up getting a show And that was, to me, was just like I made it. It was that simple. I didn't think it was going to be that simple. I heard stories about people, they had auditions, they couldn't get in, blah, 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 and it sounded like I would, and I just did it, and I just called, and it was that simple. I just took that action. And I've heard that recently, and people say that, and I got to remember that, because you'll see in the later years, I kind of doubted myself more, but it's just about taking that step and going ahead and doing it. If I would have never asked her, that I would have never got the radio show. It would not happen. I just had to make that step. I had to take that step. I had to ask. And that's really all it's about sometimes. It's just taking that initial step and going ahead and saying that, hey, I'm not going to sit back and let everything pass me by. I'm going to go ahead and take initiative. So I went ahead and I took initiative. And like I said, the rest was history. I went on for many years, off and on, having radio shows. And I think I'm going to stop there. I think I'm going to start part B. And again, the whole point about this is to why I'm starting a podcast. Because I want people to know my history and why I decided to start doing a podcast. And this is it. And I can't just sit around and say, like I said earlier, well, we're going to get microphones. It's never going to happen. But there's so much here. And I think the next part is probably the most crucial part to it, as to why I'm going to start creating a podcast too. I don't want to be that person, excuse me, you say is on the band, who's on the bandwagon of things. Like, I want to do a podcast for a very good reason. It's like in my blood. It's like what I do, and this is why. So I want you to stay tuned for my second part. This part's going to be even more interesting, and I really hope that you listen and understand with an open mind that I'm really talking about my personal life, and this is a subject that it's really sensitive to me, and it's really important to me. But most of all, like, I have to do this. And I feel that I owe it to everyone because of the gifts that I was given. That I have to pay it forward. I was put here and put in these positions for a reason. And I'm here to make a difference. I'm really here to make a huge difference. So please stay tuned for part 2 or part B. And it's going to get very, 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 very interesting. I have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. So stay tuned. Daddy out.